Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Circle of Love discussion group. Today it is Stephanie and myself, Sissel, from the Earth side, and we will see who will come from the heaven side, depending on the questions we have or if there is something they want to share with us.
Thank you, Sissel. So what do you think? Any thoughts today about where you want to go?
We can talk about the ancient history. After watching the video, the interview with Gregg Braden on Next Level Soul, I was actually wondering about the pyramids and who actually made them and for what reason were they made.
Thanks. That's a good question. So what she's talking about is an interview that I think his name is Alex Ferrari was doing with Gregg Braden. And I happened to catch a portion of that. Well, actually, I listened to it all. I don't usually listen to interviews like that because anytime I have a question, I just go to the circle and ask them, and they just tell me. And I'm like, okay, and then if I do a little research, it will generally support what they say. And so I'm like, okay, this makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, I ask them. And so I don't usually watch interviews, but I was watching that one because I was walking, and sometimes I'll just want to listen to something while I'm walking. My walk usually is about 4 miles, and so sometimes it's nice to have something to listen to, whether it's music or somebody talking or something. So I happened to listen to it, and I mentioned it earlier to Sissel and others that the circle kept saying, "Well, this isn't exactly true. This isn't exactly true." So when I got done, I talked to them about it, and so we're gonna delve into some of those subjects. So Sissel's question about who created the pyramids and when and why is a good subject. So let's see who has anything to say about that and what they have to say. Dare to question whatever we say. Dare to question it because we don't claim to have all the answers. We have the ability to see our history, and our history goes back a long, long way. This is Thomas talking to you today. And my history goes back to my first memories on a planetary system called Nibiru, which, as some of you know, was a conglomeration of small planets that existed in the area beyond Mars that we know now as the asteroid belt. However, at one time, there were habitable worlds. This is a long, long time ago, and that's where I began my memories. You might say your individual memories become the nature of your soul history. And that's where mine began. So that when I think about it and when I open up the vault of memories, you might say, well, I'm here in heaven. This is what comes up for me. And so I can only speak from my personal perspective, you see. I'm not the one who knows everything. However, what I do have here that you don't have on Earth generally is access to the memories of many others because we talk and we share and we say, do you remember that? Do you remember that? Do you remember that? And we can go ask someone. We can say, hey, you were there. What do you remember? What do you remember? So it would sort of be like if you were together with your classmates at a class reunion and you were to say, I remember this teacher. Do you remember that teacher? Do you remember that day? And somebody might say, well, I wasn't in that class, but I can tell you who was. And then you go talk to them. Do you remember this? Do you remember that day? But you see, when we're in heaven, we have clear access to our memories that you don't have on earth because we're not limited by time and space. And so we can simply explore what went before as if we were watching a movie. And we can watch this movie as if we were standing there experiencing it, you see? And so that's a big difference between here and there. And that's why when we talk to you from here, we are giving you a perspective that you might not be able to achieve on Earth. You can do research, you can read the books of people that people wrote in times of old. You can try to put it all together. However, you can't really put yourself into a position where you can see it for yourself unless you have a special quality of memory. And sometimes you'll get glimpses into your history, your past lives, you know. People do. They say, well, this seems very familiar to me. And we say, yeah, that's because you were there. You had a lifetime there. And that's why when you hear a particular language and it resonates with you in a way that others don't, it's probably because you spoke that language a lot in past lives. And some people have a better affinity for one language than another because their memories of that lifetime might have been happier than their lifetimes of others. Stephanie, for example, when she had a choice between taking Spanish or French or German in school, chose French because she preferred that language and she wanted to have nothing to do with the German language, nothing, because she died in Auschwitz, you see, and she had no good memories of Germany to speak of. She was still a young girl. And the same with Sissel. She has no good memories of Germany from her last lifetime, you see, because she also was persecuted in that lifetime. And although she survived the war, it was at great cost, and she did not live long enough to escape the scars that had come to her under the thumb of the Gestapo, you see. And so both of them have a certain repugnance to certain aspects of the German experience. Is that not right, Sissel?
It is. I never liked German at school. I couldn't
There you
learn
go. And then in this lifetime, Stephanie was born from a German lineage. 3/4 of her DNA essentially derives from Germanic sources, although in a less hostile way, because her forebears were not part of the aristocracy. They were mainly just farmers who just wanted to be left alone. And they immigrated to the USA long before World War II, or World War I for that matter. And so she bears a resemblance to her Germanic forebears. However, her soul energy says, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. I don't want to look like them. I don't want to think like them. I don't want to talk like them. And so it's just the irony of how we play on Earth that sometimes our DNA may reflect some of our worst memories, you see. And so over time, we have to rhyme our lifetimes with the overall history of mankind. So I wanted to give you that overview so that you would understand that we don't know everything. We have our memories, we can talk to others, we can put the pieces together in a way that you cannot on Earth. And then when we come to Earth, we forget it all because we immediately get reprogrammed by our parents in our society. And we have to let go of the old ideas or we would be punished, you see. And that, for example, I will talk about that right here, Stephanie, is what happened to you. Is that when you were a child and you could talk to us here in heaven without any problem, and your mother punished you because she didn't want you to be someone who would be so much trouble, you see, that you would defy the common experience, which was that you can't talk to people in heaven, and you go to heaven and you can't come back unless you're Jesus, you see. And so Steph had to pretend to be like everybody else. And eventually she began to forget that she could talk to heaven, you see. And so it had to be a ability that was rekindled when she had the leisure, that is after she retired, to focus upon it without having to play the game that others play, because she no longer had to go to the courthouse and play the game that lawyers play. She just said, I'm done with that today. I'm done with that today. Thank God. I don't have to play the game of insanity that humans play. I'll just begin to live in my own way. And now that we have cleared up some of that background, let's talk about the pyramids. I know that there was a time when mankind could elevate huge blocks of rock in a way that would be stupendous today. If you could see that happen, you would think that something very, very strange was going on. But once upon a time, it was a quality of their energy to be able to do this, you see. Now, you understand that sometimes things happen, even today, that are outside the normal patterns of reality, right? Steph had that experience when she went to a fire walk and walked across many yards of hot coals, along with a bunch of other people who did not burn their feet because they were trusting on a different vibration, you see. Altogether, they created so much power in the way that they would view this exercise that they were able to transcend the normal patterns of physical reality. And therefore, they did not burn their feet. And this happens quite a bit. There are quite a number of people that have experienced this. And they say, wow, that was interesting today. And they begin to question whether or not they're stuck in their everyday reality. They begin to question the old stories and say, well, maybe Jesus really did walk on water. Maybe he had the ability to transcend the normal rules of engagement and say, I don't care if other people sink, I'm just going to walk across this water, you see? Because we all have the capacity to decide how we're going to play the game. Because when you're on Earth, you're playing a game that says, hey, I'm not to blame, I'm not to blame, I'm not to blame for the way you see the world, because I see it through my own peepers, you see? And everybody sees their reality through their own peepers. However, if they choose to close their eyes, you might say, like the blind men around the elephant, and say, hey, what is this today? What is this? And they say, well, it's an elephant, you see, it's an elephant. That is a rope hanging down from the sky. Maybe I could pull on this rope and God would say, hey, I hear you. The bell rang. I'm going to drop some goodies on you. Or maybe they will say, this elephant has a hose here, and I don't know what it's hooked onto, but maybe I could press on it, and out of it would come some gold coins. And that's what an elephant is. Something that will give me some gold coins, you see? And so the reality on earth is so confused because of the blind people who refuse to take off their blindfolds and see what's really going on. They don't want to take off their blindfolds because if they took off their blindfolds and saw what was really going on, they might have to be like the youthful Stephanie, and their mother would punish them for talking to people who are not there and for saying that she'd gone to heaven and come back, which was impossible for her mother because her mother had her blindfold secured, so she could not hear or see anything that was not a trust on what she already knew. And what she already knew was very limited, of course, because either she had hold of the tail and all she had to do was pull on it, and God would say, "My dear, what is it I can do for you today?" Or she had a hold of the hose and was waiting for the gold coins to come flying out, or maybe she had a hold of a different part of the elephant. So everybody has a hold of the different part of the world, you see, and it is the world they see, and it is their reality. And they live accordingly until they say, "Hey, why do I have to play this way? Why do I have to play this way? Why do I always have to be the one that everybody spits on? Why do I have to be the one that has to keep running to serve you? What is wrong here?" Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this because we had some discussion about this earlier today when Steph came to say, "Hey, I forgot about something." What I forgot about was that if we're going to have a play where somebody's the dentist, you see, and somebody has to be the patient, then why should I complain if I'm the patient? Because they have to have patience if they're going to make money and get rich, you see. And so we all have to play our part in that game because we are all brothers and sisters, you see, and we're all on earth to play the game. And if you're the patient or you're the doctor, it doesn't matter. It's the same game, honey. It's the same game. And when you say, "I don't want to play that game anymore," then you say to God, "Can we have a new game? Because I don't like this one. I've been playing it for a while and I'm tired of it. And why is it that some people get to be the ones that get all the money and other people get all the honey? And some people have to pay the price for their vice." And it just goes round and round and round. It's just the game of life, you see. It's just the game of life. So when Stephanie said, "I don't like being old and having all these wrinkles," and she went to God and she said, "What's this about, God? Because I feel like I'm 10 years old inside and I want to run and play." And instead, I ask someone to come play with me and they say, "We're not going to play with you, old lady." And she says, "I want to play. Who will play with me?" And nobody wants to play with her because she's an old lady and she's supposed to just sit there and act stupid, you see, because that's the rule of the games of engagement. And she came to see that she has to play that part. Even if she feels like she's just a child inside, she has to play the part of an old lady so everybody else can play the part of being young or whatever, more age than her or younger. It's just a game that people play. And whatever part you play in it, you're still in the game, you see. You're still in the game, and it allows your brothers and sisters to play a different part. Now, Stephanie asked if we could talk about a part of this story that she discovered recently. And so we're going to post a link to it here. And you're going to get a chance to go here a marvelous talent for opening your minds, because she was so amazed that this young man could play so many different parts in one short video, and with such excellence that you could have sworn you knew these people. And he could play females with so much credibility that you'd forget he had a beard and mustache, you see. And she said to me, "Well, Thomas, I just realized that this is the way God plays. God plays all the parts. And so what he's doing is he's showing people that he can play all the parts just like God does. And that should open their minds a little bit, soften them up, you might say, to understand that we're all in it together, you see, and that we play a part with our brothers and sisters that contributes to the whole, you see, contributes to the whole. And so from this little exhibition of this one guy playing these different parts, there emerged a whole story. It was a whole story that she watched, and she was amazed how accurate it was. Because, of course, Steph at one time had children and went to parent teacher conferences, and she also was a teacher and conferred with parents and students at different times. So she had to laugh because it was so accurate. And yet it was only one guy playing the parts. And he was playing a lot of parts in a lot of videos. And so someone like this is helping humanity to let down their limits on their ability to bypass their programming and come to see that there's just one of us and we're playing all the parts. And we should smile and say, "Hey, this is my part to play today. I'm going to be the whiny wife or the reluctant employee or the patient, you see. And I'm going to play it well because I know that if I don't play my part, you can't play yours. And it's just a joke, you see. It's just a big farce. That's all it is. It's a farce. And I'll just play an old lady, you see. And everybody will say, well, you're too old for me. You're decrepit. You can't handle this job. You can't play soccer. You can't do this. And Steph will say, well, thank you, God, for letting me play this part, because I've come to see that we all have to play all the parts, you see, because we may be one, but we are also many, and we will play it all. So back to the pyramids. The pyramids were created to play another game. And that game was to say to the brothers and sisters of the ones who created the pyramids, hey, don't forget us. Don't forget us. Because we are your brothers and sisters, you see? And we will be here for eternity. And so will you. So will you. Don't forget that we're going to be playing this game for a long, long time. Don't forget that we are you and you are us. And that sometimes in the way that people play, they forget who they are. They forget that they are souls that come from heaven and that have to be encapsulated into a physical form in order to play their parts, you see, in the stories of endless and exciting farces. It is farcical. And so they said, let's create a pyramid that will withstand the climate changes that will be here when others come to see that we were intelligent, we were wise, and we had the eyes that could see past the physical reality. We could see something that was so magnificent that we need to leave a reminder for those who come after, because we're well aware that much of humanity will wear their hair in a way to say, hey, we're too stupid to understand what you say. We're too stupid to understand about how we all play together, because we're all brothers and sisters in the playground that God created for us. We're too stupid to see that. And so we got together and we said, well, let's leave them a reminder. Okay? And so the pyramids were built long ago in a day when Atlantis was still viable, you see. And the technology that created the pyramids was well established on Atlantis, because it happened to be that Atlantis was a place in the Atlantic Sea at that time where there had grown up a mighty civilization. And that mighty civilization came to be because there just happened to be a group of humans who landed there and said, well, thank God we escaped all those barbarians who were trying to kill us. So let's try to live together in peace and harmony. And because they were very intelligent, you see, because they were a group of very, very old souls who had come from Nibiru and who were a combination of the earliest humans that were created with the Anunnaki DNA and the soul of those who had actually been Anunnaki. And so they had a lot of technical knowledge in their soul history. And so they created a civilization on Atlantis, such as would be a marvel today. And they had access to all the technologies that would allow them to live in a way that would be very, very capable of sustaining all of humanity today. Although, as time passed, they got a little bit arrogant, you see. And so, although they had such a wonderful civilization, they began to send envoys into the rest of the world. And they would say, hey, we're here to help you understand how to improve your own lifestyles. And at that time, throughout the world, there were so many populations of the humans who did not have this extensive soul history, because there were many humans who came to be individuated souls, you see, during the reign of the Anunnaki, which was only about 280,000 years ago. So they did not have the hundreds of thousands of incarnations that we had in order to come to see that we had to be a little more proactive in our trust on God energy. We had to be a little bit more open to the idea that there was one of us playing many parts. And of course, this is very difficult to see from the human perspective, because everybody looks different than you. You say, well, you're different than me. You're not me. You're not me. And of course, they are not you because they don't have your soul history. So you're all distinct, you see. But the nature of God energy is so great that it can be separated into all these different strands of soul history and yet function in a way that will say, hey, I'm here to play today. I'm here to play today. Who wants to play with me? And others may say, hey, I'll play with you. I'll play with you. And some will say, I'm not going to play with you. I'm going to kill you because you don't play the way I like. And that was the way for most of humanity in that day. So we're talking about 20,000 years ago. And there were a lot of people who wanted to play in their own way. And they said the way we play is to kill those who don't play our way. And we steal all their goods and we take their women and we rape them and then we kill them if we can, or we leave them to raise our children, you see? And this is a little bit like the Anunnaki because that's what the Anunnaki did. They mixed their DNA with the DNA of the various animals that they chose from Earth, which in our case was the orangutan, and in the case of most of humanity was the chimpanzee. And they left their children to raise the children of the Anunnaki. And this is how convoluted the story is. It's a very convoluted story, people. It's very convoluted. And until you come to see that we're all one energy and that we get to play this game forever because we're so clever that we can fool ourselves over and over again, forget who we are, then you won't understand what I'm saying. However, if you're beginning to get a clue, then I love you and you love me because you see that I am the same as you. I am just another strand of energy that will combine to enhance this story, just as you do, just as you do. So when you take off that blindfold you see and you see the whole elephant, you say, hey, your hose is my tail, is my rope that I could pull to get God's attention. And your hose is the one that gives you the golden coins, or at least you hope it will, although it might not. And so now I see that I was so mistaken. I was so stupid. It's only an elephant, you see, that has these different characteristics. And so here I am, the fool. Here I am, the fool. And this is the nature of the realization that comes to people that have an awakening, you see. They say, oh my God, how foolish was I? How stupid I was. And they laugh and say, well, I guess it's just the play of life, you see. It's the play of the light that made me think that I was living in a dark cave, you see, when really the love of God was always a part of me. And this is what happened to you, Sissel, right?
Yes.
And it's what happened to Stephanie. It's happened to many people. And they can never tell anybody else what happened to them because it is one of the aspects of reality that you have to see it for yourself. You have to see it for yourself. You can't tell anybody else how to see reality. It's just something that occurs one day when you say, fuck all this stupidity. I'm tired of it. I give up. And God will say, thank you, my dear, because I was hoping you'd get rid of all that shit. Just throw it away and say, you guys are all stupid. I don't know what this is going on here. I must be as stupid as you. And then I can say, hey, here's a clue. Here's a clue for you because you took off the blindfold, you see. And you came to see that all of life was a farce. And that meant you immediately began to think that all of life was a joy. And that all you had to do was play the game. It wasn't a farce anymore. It was just a game of love that you would play because God came to you to say, I love you. I love you because I am you and you are me and you are everyone you see. And everyone you see is me and everyone is you. And we'll just keep playing this game because I like it. You see, I like it. I like it a lot. And so the ones who are awakened come to see that it's no longer a farce, you see. It's a happy game that we will play forever and ever and ever because we are the children of the light. And that is how it came to be. And so the pyramids you see were built by the Elohim and the Anunnaki, that is to say, the souls who had come from Nibiru. And they are a tribute to the ancient architecture of Nibiru, where they began their journeys, you see, through time and space. And so those pyramids mimic the mountains, you see, in a very real way. We can look at the mountains behind Sissel and we can say, hey, look at that pyramid there. Because the mountains begin at a wide base and they narrow to a point on top. And that point you see is when you come to understand that all of reality is upside down. It's upside down. You think it starts at the base, but it starts at the pinnacle. So when we're in heaven and we look down and we say, hey, look at that mountain that spreads out from that single point. And so the pyramids are there to remind you that you have it all backwards, you see? That you have it all upside down. And so the Great Pyramids at Giza were created about, I'm going to say, can you guys help me today? Just a moment, I'm looking for some help from some others here. About 16 or 17,000 years ago. And they were subjected to a lot of wear and tear over the years. As you know, Atlantis was no more after they did get so arrogant, which is a problem for humanity. It's after a while you start to get very, very arrogant. They had become so arrogant that they began to fight among themselves over stupid stuff. All you have to do is go into the halls of Congress today and say, oh my God, it's just a revisiting of the time of the deterioration of Atlantis, you see, because they couldn't even make up their mind how to protect the people anymore. And so the thermonuclear devices they had were not upgraded as they should have been, because the powers that be could not agree on what to do and how to spend their money and energy in a way that would protect themselves and the love of humanity. And so there was a catastrophic failure in the energetic system on Atlantis that caused it to sink into the sea because the bombardment of radioactive waves. So much disturbance in the underlying seabed and the foundations of the island that it simply crumbled into the sea because it could not withstand the atomic devastation that occurred that day. So remember this, all of you people who trust on nuclear power. Remember it. Because one day you may revisit this scenery when your government and the people that are paid to take care of you only want to take care of themselves, you see. They don't give a shit about you because they only want to be the golden idol. And we won't go into the story of the golden idol because that is an old one. So that is the story of the pyramids, you see. Does this generate any other questions for you?
First, I want to say that it's very, very interesting. You say that they were built so we could understand there have been civilizations and that thrived, that was very intelligent before, because history tells that we come to be 5,000 years ago. So they won't look into proofs today that things are much older than that, because they have to change all history. So it's very, very interesting.
That is correct.
Yeah. So it's very, thank you for telling all this. Yeah, I liked it.
That's why the pyramids were there, to remind us we have it all backwards.
Yeah. Very, very, very good. And can you say something about the Sphinx? There are people saying that there are scripts that are hidden under the paws or something underneath the Sphinx that will be revealed someday.
No, I'm not aware of any scripts or scriptures or scrolls or writings that are hidden under the Sphinx. However, as I say, I don't know everything, so let me see if anyone has any information on that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have information on it. This is Michelangelo. And you know me by that name. However, I also had an identity in that day and age as a geologist, you see, because I was one of the humans who came to be surrounded by a geology that baffled me. Because everywhere I looked, I could see that there was this encroaching sea that would soon cover the land because the land was sloping down into the sea. And I thought to myself, well, how can this be after all these years that the water is encroaching into my reality? Because I lived in that area where the Great Sphinx is. And I said to myself, well, let us see why this would be. And after a while, I came to understand that there was a pile of habitual trust on a very, very, very old religion. This was the religion of the ones who trusted on the Anunnaki. They trusted on the golden idol, you see, and they trusted that they would be raised up if they did everything they were told and covered in gold and taken up into the spaceship in the sky. They didn't necessarily call it a spaceship because they never understood how the Anunnaki had arrived on Earth, you see. All they knew was it was bright and shiny, and it glinted in the sun. And they said, wow, that must be the place we want to be because it's so shiny, you see. And so the tendency of humanity to be attracted to that which is shiny is very, very old and very, very cold because the Anunnaki played in a way that was very, very, very cruel. They were very cruel to their children, you see, because they were so cruel to themselves that they could not be released from their imprisonment in that shiny toy in the sky. And so the people who remembered the Anunnaki as the ones who had control of them and trusted on a story that the Anunnaki had created them, thought that the Anunnaki were the most powerful beings in all of creation. Because they were very powerful, of course, in that day. And these stories continued to play through their minds through the generations and confuse them, you see, because they were so confused in the beginning that this confusion became their historical story that was passed down from generation to generation. So they thought that the Anunnaki, being the most powerful beings in all of creation, were like their gods, you see. And so they were not familiar with the personal God energy that flows through everything and that animates you and me. That was not something they could comprehend, you see. They just couldn't comprehend it. They had not achieved enough experience in their soul history in order to come to see that the Anunnaki were players in the story of God energy, just like everyone else. They had a part to play. And we all have parts to play in the farce that we think is reality. It's not reality. It's just the children of the light playing hide and seek through the night. So they built a temple, you see, to the Anunnaki because they revered them. And they thought that if they did everything the Anunnaki told them to, then the Anunnaki would save them. Now, the Anunnaki went away, of course, one day, and humanity was freed from under their thumb, but they were never freed from their trust that the Anunnaki were the ones who gave them life and then took it away from them because they refused to play the way the Anunnaki told them to. And they got so confused. This story is so confused, people, that they began to blame the Elohim, who were the ones who tried to help them to survive and to be happy and free. And they began to revere the Anunnaki. So you might say they hated the angels and they loved the devils, although they were so confused that they had it turned upside down, you see, just like that mountain turned upside down, just like that pyramid that stands on its tip, because it all begins with one dimension, you see, everything begins with one dimension. There's not 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions or 100 dimensions. There is one. And we call that God. We also call it love. It is where it all begins, you see? In the indistinguishable point of our history that is so far beyond our capacity to stand upon that point. If we are climbing the mountain, that we can only know it as the beginning of all of creation, you see? And so the temple was built to the Anunnaki, and it had fallen to ruins, you see, because I was exploring that area and I found the remnants of it, and I could see that it had a history of trust on the Anunnaki because there were a lot of artifacts there. There were a lot of artifacts that I could see, writings, etc., and they could still be read by me because our history was still to be united in that area in our language and our ability to comprehend each other, even though I did not belong to this cult, you might say, that trusted on the Anunnaki. I trusted on the one God, you see, the one point of reality in which everything else spreads. And so I consulted with the ones I knew, and they said, well, this is interesting because in our history, you see, we were familiar with a great earthquake that had happened in that area. And we concluded that the temple had been destroyed by the earthquake, you see, and the people had been scattered and perhaps died in the earthquake or in the tsunami that followed. And we began to explore the area. Now, in that day and age, the waters began to recede, you see, because there was a change in the topography of the earth. That's all I can say, is that the waters had once flooded that area, but they had begun to recede. And after they receded, the area came alive with vegetation. It was very, very fertile at that time. This is the area of Egypt where the Sphinx is found. And it was very, very, very fertile in that day. And we came to say, as time went by, wow, God must have intended to destroy that temple, you see, and return the earth to a trust on its natural beauty. And it was in that day and age, not during that one lifetime, but I came back in another lifetime in the same area, that it was decided to build a monument to God energy and to the natural world, you see, because those of us who did not trust on the Anunnaki trusted that the earth was our mother and that God was our father, you see. And in order to have a symbol of this, we chose the lion, because the lion in a bygone day was the symbol of the protector of humanity, because the lion hunted very, very large animals that then disturbed the peace and harmony of the humans, you see. And so we would see that the lion had taken down a large bird, for example, that would plague us, because in that day there were some very, very large, what you would call prehistoric type birds that would use us as prey. And the remains of that bird would be there after the lions had had their share. And we would say, well, thank God for the lions. Thank God for the lions. And so we created a monument to the lion, you see, through the technology that we had, because we also had a long technical history, you see, because we were also the ones who had come from Nibiru so long ago. You can call these the old souls if you like. And of course, we weren't all from Nibiru. There were others among us who had become individuated souls, so that their first memories were under the Anunnaki, but they did not trust on the Anunnaki as gods, because they trusted on those of us who had once been the Elohim to help them see that the Anunnaki were not there to do them any good. We had to be grateful for their DNA that had helped us to save the day. However, they were not there to create us for any good purpose. They were there to use us as slaves, you see. And we should trust on the fact that they were gone, and that we had the ability to live on the earth in peace and harmony with each other, just as the balance of nature showed us that if we could adapt to a world, you see, we would also live in peace and harmony. Now, when Atlantis went down, there was another flood that came to that area, and it inundated the Sphinx. And when the flood waters receded, the old tribes that revered the Anunnaki came back to the area, and they did say, hey, look at this crazy thing here. We should fix it. So that will put the head of one of the Anunnaki on the body of this decrepit lion, you see, because the damn lion is not a friend to you and me, because we kill them for sport, you see. They didn't actually kill them for sport at that time, but they had no reverence for the other animals on the earth. And they would kill them without regard to the fact that they were in the same fix, you see, as the animals. They depended upon each other for survival. And so that's what they did. Now, the head of the Sphinx is not accurate in terms of the Anunnaki. The one very distinctive feature that is true of the Anunnaki is the stylized beard that appears on the portrayals of the pharaohs, you see, that came to be a response to the trust on being so perfect that the Anunnaki would come back and rescue them, you see. They would come back and take them to live in the spaceship in the sky in immortality. And this whole story is, again, so confused that every story is infused with a bit of the truth and a lot of lies, you see, because the Anunnaki did not look like the pharaohs. The fact that they drew these dark lines to the side of their eyes is a recognition that the Anunnaki had eyes that could see to the side. And so it was almost like they could look behind themselves, you see. And human eyes don't have that mobility. The eyes of the Anunnaki actually stretched to the side of their heads enough that they could rotate their eyeballs there and see you creeping up on them, you see. And so there are a few vestiges of a trust on the Anunnaki on the heads of the pharaohs, you see. because the beards of the Anunnaki did grow from a very, very rounded dip on their chins and did not cover their entire jaw, just that area where the hair would grow long, like the beards of the portraits of the pharaohs. However, most of their features are more in keeping with the features of the first humans, the Elohim, who had very regular features, you see, as we would think of it on Earth today, and were often the inspiration for the portrayal of angels in the paintings. And so the confabulation of characteristics of the Anunnaki, the Elohim, and the other humans created so much intrigue and retreat from reality that it's quite a story to unravel today. However, that is the source of the story of the Sphinx and the Sphinx, because of its particular trust on the natural world, also became the inspiration of the people from Atlantis who created the pyramids. So you could say the Sphinx predates the pyramids, you see. And the temple to the Anunnaki predated the Sphinx. And because the Sphinx was erected on the site of that ancient temple grounds you see, there may be some stories of the artifacts that could be found under the Sphinx from the era of that temple, you see? And that's quite possible. I can't discount that today, that there would be some tablets or other writings that persist in the deep sands and grounds under the Sphinx. Okay?
Thank you. That was really interesting. I have learned a lot today. I got a new understanding of both the Sphinx and the pyramids.
Now, these stories are fascinating, aren't they?
Very, very much, yes. And it makes sense. And I have heard that the Sphinx had a lion head and it was changed. So it was very, very good to hear everything. So it actually was changed twice, the head, after the
I didn't
flooding.
hear about the other one.
Yeah, it was built as you said that it was built with like and something they prayed to for the Anunnaki. And then there came the flood and they made the lion head. They built it up again, he said.
Oh, I don't know about that. All I know is what I've heard is that what he said today was that the lion's head, it was originally a lion, and then after the flood, they came in and constructed. I don't know if the lion's head was deconstructed during the flood, whether it was, enough of it was eroded, but they came and built the head of the Anunnaki as they understood it, part of their religious trust on the Anunnaki, their traditional trust. And whether or not the pharaohs later on started adopting this particular appearance or not, I can't say. I wonder about the covering of the head. I'm going to ask them about that, okay?
Yeah.
Of the Sphinx, you know how they have that covering that comes down like this, and it sort of
it's
has
like the pharaohs are pictured with those.
Right.
Too.
I'm going to ask them where that comes from. The headdress on the portrayals of the pharaohs and others who had a particular trust on the traditional view of the Anunnaki derives from a time when they would display their headgear that they would wear when they would first step off the spaceship that would land on the Earth. So it was more like a space shuttle because it would go back and forth from the mothership. And they would have this gear on their head that allowed them to protect their physical form from the storm of energy that would accost them as they came through the atmosphere. So it was a protective gear that they would wear. However, once they landed, they would remove it, you see, because they had no longer had any use for it. And so it was just like saying that they had a helmet that they would wear that somewhat resembled this tree, this very stylized, because it didn't really look like that. It's just very stylized today. This very stylized version of a helmet, you see. So what the Anunnaki wore was more like a helmet. And when they would take it off, you could see their hair, which stuck up in the air, more like the idols that we were talking about the other day from South America and Mexico, etc., where they would create these models of the Anunnaki that were actually more accurate than the ones that are portrayed in the Middle East, you see. The idols that are created with the very thick lips and the broad nose and the top knot are much more like the Anunnaki, actually.
Interesting. Okay. That's interesting.
Other questions? It is interesting. It's fascinating to get this perspective on it.
Very much.
I hadn't heard that. I hadn't heard that before about the. I know that they had told me that when they were on Earth, when I was doing that forensic drawing of the Anunnaki, that they didn't wear a hat on Earth. So it just must have been that helmet that they would remove.
And it's interesting that South America has more accurate pictures of them than in the Middle East.
Right. Is there an explanation for why that might be? Do you guys have any thoughts on that one? And by the way, who told us about the helmet? Was that Tobias? Yes, Tobias. Okay, well, understand that all of humanity has grown up in a trust on their own reality. And so the stories change. You know that. The stories change from continent to continent because of how the parents portray it to the children, you see? And so gradually they form another view of reality that seems very distinct from the one that others present. So if you set some of those old carvings from South America next to the portraits of the Egyptians and the pharaohs from several thousand years ago, you would say these are not related at all. And yet they are, you see. They each focused on different components of the story and developed those components in a way that seemed to say that they were completely different from each other, and yet they're not. This is another way of saying that we start with one point and we work down from there. Mm-hmm. And so the base of the mountain seems to be very broad, and there seems to be a lot of topography and a lot of rock down there, but it all comes from the pinnacle, you see? And this is also another way to say that your history all begins today. Mm-hmm. That you are here. I am here. We are here. This is our reality. And everything that we explore moves down into the broad base of the bases of the mountain, you see? So we come down the faces of the mountain and we say, well, this history is connected to that history. This is connected to that. And eventually, if we lose sight of the peak of the mountain, you see, we try to connect things, like trying to connect all the dots, and we can't see where it all began. We can't see that it all begins with me, because I am the historian, you see. I am always the historian that carries the story within me, because I always see through my own peepers, you see. And so even as you and I and Sissel are here together today, and I tell you my point of view, you are the historian that takes it in to your memory, and now it's a part of your soul history. Do you see how it develops in this way? So we are all the historian. It all comes back to me. It always comes back to me that I am here, and this is what I hear. This is what I see. I am here because I am the one who hears reality. And I hear the stories that don't make sense, you see? And I say, well, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And your mother says to you, that's okay. It's not supposed to make sense, dear. We just have to have faith that it's all true. And you say, well, boo-hoo. I don't think that I want to play that way. I want to figure out how it all connects, because I trust that in some deep part of me that it all starts from the same point, you see. And therefore it all has to integrate in a way that will say, hey, it all started from the same point. It didn't just grow up haphazardly. And so the story of humanity did not grow up haphazardly. It all goes back to a singular point, you might say, to the appearance of the Anunnaki in this story. That is the story of humanity on Earth. It is not necessarily the story of the soul history, because what you begin to find when you start looking for the point where everything begins is that the story goes on and on and on and on and on, because that's the nature of God energy, you see, that it's not limited by you or me. It belongs to God, you see. It belongs to the one God who tells the story and lets his children play in a way that makes him smile and say, hey, honey, have you figured out the farce today? Are you ready to come and say, hey, God, what a wonderful play. What a wonderful play. I like to play the way that we do on Earth. It's so much fun.
It is. It is. Mm-hmm. And it gets more and more fascinating the more I learn.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know all these details. Mm. So, as long as we're here, there is a theory that was presented by Mr. Braden in his interview that a comet was responsible for the flood. they now accept, or at least he accepts, and a lot of scientists do, that the gouging on the Sphinx was from, it was a fluvial. In other words, it was from water and not from air and wind, which I think I read that when I was a kid, that it was from air and wind, wind action, but it's actually from the flood. But their theory is that there was a big comet that crashed. And what he said, there was a big comet that crashed and created the floods and everything by the impact. However, because they couldn't find a big impact, they came up with this theory that it was a bunch of fragments that hit the earth and had the same impact. And I did ask them about that, and they told me that it was not those craters, that I think they have something, platinum or other things that are not natural to the earth dust, were because of the mining operations of the Anunnaki. They had a special way that they would create these sort of a canopy over a certain area and disintegrate the minerals within, or cause them to rise to the surface in such a way that they could more easily mine them, which might have to do with why the blocks of stone are so solid in the pyramid, etc., because that same kind of technology could clean out some impurities. I'm not sure about that, but it could be. So let me see what they say about that. Thomas will handle that question, Steph, because I have studied this problem. We've discussed it already, but I think it's good to revisit it. And so what I know is that when the Anunnaki came to Earth, they had to discern what animal minerals were there, how valuable they would be to them, and whether the deposits were significant enough to cause them to go through the very, very complicated process of mining them, you see, because they had to create a workforce because they didn't know how else they could do it. Somebody asked the other day why they couldn't use robots, and that would be a nightmare, you see. They'd have to have all the parts to create the robots, and the robots would have to be able to do the chores they wanted to do, and they'd have to continually service them, you see, and it just didn't make any sense to them, because you have to understand the Anunnaki were kind of robots themselves, because they served their ship, you see, so they just had to do whatever their ship told them to. So their lives were very robotic. So it was not a big stretch for them to see others behaving in a similar robotic way, you see. And so the solution was for them to create a race of beings on Earth that would be their beasts of burden, you see, and they would be robotic in the way they behave, just like the Anunnaki were robotic in the way that they behaved. And so they set about to create humanity. The problem, you might say the fly in the ointment, was that humanity was created from the wild animals, you see, and they were a little too wild for the Anunnaki. They weren't as robotic as they would like. And so the Anunnaki had to deal with the rebelliousness in their own children, you see. And this is a whole nother story that we will get into. However, the point is that those craters were created by the Anunnaki, who were exploring the Earth to determine what sites had the minerals they needed and how they could mine them, you see. And so it was sort of like they did have this blast of energy. That's the best way I can explain it, that would pulverize the stone and create its own reaction, you see, and that allowed them to determine what minerals were there and how they could mine them, you see. So I won't get into the whole process here because it's very technical, and there is a lot of scientific evidence that can support this. However, the science is rather complicated for someone like Steph to be able to understand it as I talk to her. So I'll just let it be for now, and gradually we will investigate this particular history of the way the Anunnaki treated Mother Earth, because it wasn't their mother, you see, but it was to become the mother that they would have to come to know, or they would become like the stepchildren, you see, who had to live among their own progeny.
Mhm. Interesting.
Any last questions before we sum up?
I don't have any for the moment, but I suppose it will come because
Okay.
there is a lot to investigate. You have the Antarctica and all these things showing up there under the ice.
It's interesting
So,
that they say the pyramids were created about, what they say, 16, 17,000 years ago.
mhm,
So predating the flood by 4 or 5,000 years. And the flood, of course, was connected, the sinking of we should cover that. The sinking of Atlantis, I already know from other discussions, was the cause of the Younger Dryas, which was a sudden reversal of the natural warming trajectory of the Earth, and also that a lot of climatic changes had to do with its early mining. And so Thomas has a lot to say about a lot of things, and some of it I'd love to get into has to do with climate change, and he's talked to me about things with terms and stuff I didn't know about the ocean, something, terms that I didn't know. I think it's called bicarbonization or something, and thermal vents and tectonic plates. And he kind of indicated to me where these thermal vents and this thing was off South America that was contributing to the inability of Antarctica to maintain its ice cover because it's been falling dramatically. But his theory is different than what he says, is different than what a lot of people say. These thermal vents play an important part. And also, he says they play an important part in the North Atlantic, and that will change, even if the currents change, that what they call the AMOC fails current, that it will affect uh, the uh, the future temperatures in the area, because right now the currents are not allowing I don't understand too much the thermal vents to heat the water in the way they normally would. I suppose they're just dispersing the water through the currents instead of letting it rise. I don't know how that works. But anyway, these thermal vents are significant in his understanding of the impending issues and solutions that the Earth is going to have to rebalance its energy, and that there's something under the ice in Antarctica that actually can prevent it from freezing. Just he used the example of carbonated water in a bottle, that doesn't freeze at the same temperature as normal. So I don't know. Somehow there's something that's released, whether it's oxygen or carbon molecules, I don't know, from the ocean, because I'm not familiar with all this. But somehow, if it can't be released into the air, then it can form like a little cushion under ice or something. So I don't know. He is technical, and I don't really understand it all. And I'd have to go back and look at what he said to be able to accurately portray it. But anyway, it's interesting stuff. And it would be interesting to have a session where we discuss some of this.
Yes.
And how he sees it affecting the future climates and ice cover, etc.
Yeah. Yes, that will be very interesting.
So what were we going to ask? We had a question we were going to ask. Something about
the melting of the ice.
Huh?
You said the melting of the ice in Antarctica.
Well, we talked about that a little bit, but there was something else that he was gonna talk about, that I asked a question, but it's okay. We'll save it for another day. And just thank everybody and see if anybody wants to sum up today. Steve would like to sum up today because I believe that we are beginning to resurrect an old vibration that was a powerful force that once drove a lot of the inspiration on Earth. And that powerful energy is very, very, very widely distributed today because of the internet, you see. So many people can tune into these stories and these ideas that couldn't before. And so these podcasts that people do are giving people an opportunity to listen to the stories of various individuals and the theories that contradict the old time religion, you might say. And that old time religion had humanity in its grip for so long, and in so many places. However, one thing that is unique today is that although civilizations have come and gone, and we can get into that at some point, there has never been this worldwide net of communication that we have today. Never in the history of humanity has there been this ability to communicate with each other from all sectors of the world. And this digital revolution has a part to play in the coming day. Now, we have to say here that technology is not the solution or the future of humanity. Art is. Art-based living is the answer, people. And if you have technology without heart, you have only a part of the answer, you see. You can't survive without the living water that comes to you when you go to the source of spirit and say, help me today, help me today. Help me to understand this, because from here on earth, all I see is that upside down mountain, you see? And I don't understand how it all began. I don't understand where it's all going. I don't understand my part to play. However, the one thing I do know, and I will say this boldly because I believe that all of you know this in your hearts, that the one thing I know is that we all want to be happy. We all want to smile, and we all want to say, I love you today. We all want to look around at our world and say, what a good day, what a good day. So how do we get there, people? How do we get there where everyone can look around and say, what a good day today? This is why we are here. This is why we are here today, and this is why I spent my life dealing with technology and pulling out my hair, because I would despair over and over and over again at the mendacity of humanity. And I could not escape it myself, you see. I could not escape the hatred that was all around me for each other. Because people who do not love each other have only hate in their hearts, you see. Because love goes back to the pinnacle of creation. Love is what you're created from. Love is what the mountain is created from. It's where it all begins. It all begins with love, you see. And if you trust on me to be the one who could see the way to create a company that would bring to you so much pleasure, you see, then trust on me to tell you that the days of old will fade away, because the new gold will be the gold in your heart, you see, and the golden heart will be the trust on the end of the golden idol, because the golden heart is full of love, you see, and the golden idol is cold. It is cold to the touch. So, which would you rather have? Which would you rather have? I will leave you with this final word. And the final word is God. God is the final word, and it is the beginning word, because you see, God is the trust on the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. God is the trust that you will always be in the arms of eternity, because eternity is the beginning and the end, and its only reality is that you will never come to the end and you will never find the beginning until you let go of your trust on being alone. You see, you're not alone. You are all one. Okay?
Thank you. That was a beautiful final words.
That was a good session, huh?
Yeah, very much so.
Fun.
Yep.
All right, Sissel, I'll let you go. I know. And we'll talk soon.
Yep.
At least a week from now. Okay?
Yeah. We do.
All right, bye you. Love to everybody out there. You know, what can I say other than come and play? Come and play.
It will make your day.